Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Soul Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Smiles Lewis. Welcome to another live edition of Anomaly Now, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the weekly live news roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives, located here in Austin, Texas. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in, whether live or Memorex. Do all the usual, like, subscribe, smash the notification bell, blah, blah, blah. I think we're like teetering on the edge of 400 subscribers to the channel. It's only been 4 or 5 years. So, hey, if you aren't subscribed, maybe you could be that person that pushes us over the edge. If you don't, it'll push me over the edge. Just kidding. Everything's great. Yes, it is Wednesday. It is not July 1st. It's July 31st. Oh, my goodness. Thought I corrected that. Well, welcome again to the July 31st, Wednesday, 2024 edition of Anomaly Now. And you should, if you aren't, you might consider going to patreon.com/Anomaly Archives and consider becoming a Patreon, a patron, a supporter, a donor at the monthly level of $1, $2, $5, $10. Oh gosh, you could even do 20. Thank you all who have become members. Or if you can't do that, become a free member and get the notifications. We're going to start posting a lot more information about the activities of the archives and materials, both free and otherwise. And we'd like you to consider joining. Meanwhile, you can, of course, go to our website, anomalyarchives.org. And there you will find all kinds of information about our 7,000 plus archive collection of books on UFOs, consciousness, parapsychology, Bermuda Triangle, Atlantis, crop circles, consciousness. I think I said that already. But really, what is consciousness? It's such a dirty word. Anyway, you can also go to our Flipboard where you can find more information about all the links that I share, that I flip over to the flipboard.com website where it's flipboard.com/@Anomaly Archives, and there's a link there that'll take you to the actual Flipboard. Over 11,000 stories, tons and tons of materials there. We're not going to get to a lot of this. It was one of those things. I had a few things picked out for tonight and was like, gosh, I guess I'll just talk about these few things. And then suddenly in the last 48 hours, bam, 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 a whole ton of stuff came up that I'm like, wow, that's a lot of fun and interesting stuff. Some of the stuff that we're not going to get to is a follow-up to last week's report on the discovery of a possible sign of life in the Venus clouds. This CNN article goes into some good detail about that might help us all understand why this is interesting and important. And of course, further down is information about this possible life found in a rock on Mars. So life finally popping up in our own solar systems beyond Earth. That could be pretty cool. Meanwhile, strange stuff in and around Texas. This one from the Cron, that's the Houston Chronicle, Cron.com. Apex predator seen swimming in Galveston is nightmare for beachgoers. Sure enough, there is an alligator seen in the waves at the beach. And this isn't that unusual, but several people are thinking it's actually a crocodile. But, if you know about these things, one's saltwater, one isn't. But some interesting information there. Texas Parks and Wildlife Division of state government chimes in with their input on that. Some other great stuff. Trail cameras capture rare strawberry creature in Tanzania for first time. That's over at thestate.com. Liberation Times reports unexplained intrusions at nuclear sites met with silence from Department of Energy as decades of secrecy faced intense scrutiny. I think I had seen this video of that committee meeting and that cross-examination. And over at Dustin Slaughter's Substack, UAP incursion at Pancakes nuclear facility revealed a newly released document. That's a nuclear material facility here in Texas. Again, we've been kind of keep touching on, and we will touch on again today on this issue of UFOs and nuclear facilities, but only kind of just tangentially. It'll go in an interesting, different direction that I wasn't expecting. Meanwhile, our good friend Greg Bishop in the Radio Misterioso Facebook group posted this link to a Scientific American article by Phil Plait, Plait, called "Nope, It's Never Aliens," as a great example of debunkers being idiots, or debunkers who skeptics that refuse to even consider the possibility that there's something more going on with UFOs and the phenomenon. And I have not had the chance to read it yet, but I don't really want to because of the criticism. I mean, I'm all for reading skeptics, and I'm going to be reading a lot of stuff from skeptics tonight. But this article is a classic case of this false dichotomy of it either is aliens or it's nothing. And I'm sorry, I think it can be a lot more. I think it can be a whole lot of things and still possibly aliens, and then still a whole lot of nothing. Just imagine the very basic idea of the 80% haystack of UFOs is IFOs. That's the majority of UFO sighting reports represent identifiable flying objects or things that can be known if we have enough information. Oh, it's that refrain again from the Air Force and Project Blue Book, and now or more recently Arrow, that we have some unidentifieds, but if we just had more information, we could identify them. Some other interesting links over at the Flipboard. Two things from SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, announces partnership with the Latin American Academy of Scientific Ufology, as well as Executive Board member Robert Powell, to present at the 2024 American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics Aviation Forum. That's pretty cool. Way to go, Robert. And a very strange, interesting project called Project Nano. Mork and Mindy reference? No. And then, of course, here in Texas, again, massive wave of earthquakes. And I saw a UFO researcher who I respect, who's cataloged lots and lots of humanoid cases over the years, more than most people, who said, they're going to blame it on fracking. Well, yeah. And is it any wonder that the Texas oil regulator is investigating? It is generally accepted that earthquakes are one of the side effects of sending all these noxious chemicals into the earth to push out more natural gas or more oil. I think it may only work with oil. I'm not really sure. But whether this is going on, there seems to be a concomitant increase in earthquake activity. Surprise, surprise. Strongest swarm of earthquakes was of a 5.1 magnitude recorded on Friday in West Texas. Very interesting stuff. It even, and the UFO connection. Yes, right. There's always got to be a UFO connection. I am a longtime fan of Michael Persinger's tectonic strain theory, the TST, or Paul Devereaux's Earthlights hypothesis. This idea that there is tectonic activity that creates strain, and then these piezoelectric and or some kind of other plasma type phenomena is released and are seen and identified as UFOs because they are seemingly flying, and their lights in the sky at night, sometimes in the day even, and it may in the daytime appear like Mercury, like a metallic craft, according to some researchers. Now, these theories have been slightly tested scientifically, and there does seem to be some evidence for this being a real phenomenon. Like so many things, it may be that certain government or corporate entities have a lot more information about how to do this than we do. So who knows? But there is a lot of good, valid scientific criticism and critique of the TST and Earthlights hypothesis. But nonetheless, I find it very compelling and encourage folks to look into that. But it really surprised me. Some of you probably saw the Project Blue Book TV series several years ago, and I was really excited when one of the episodes that had connections to MKUltra also invoked this idea of UFO phenomena instigated by fluid injection, fracking. I don't know that there's any relevance to the Blue Book case files that I'm aware of that touches on any of that, but it was neat to see that worked into an episode. Meanwhile, something else don't want to go into too deep on, but sure enough, it's very interesting. Some of you all might recall that there was what many people believe was a hit piece, and in fact, an inappropriate use of journalistic investigatory efforts on the part of a writer for The Intercept, I believe, or was it the Daily Beast? I forget. But it's in the article here at the LudenTimes.com website. UFO whistleblower sues sheriff's office over records release. Basically, in a nutshell, the David Grush, the whistleblower, is filing a $1 million+ lawsuit against the sheriff's department for having released the documents about his having been remanded against his will temporarily to a mental hospital for evaluation. And according to, I believe, the state's laws, that is not something that can be released through Freedom of Information Act to journalists. But that's probably maybe grossly misrepresenting that, but you can go to the website and check that out. I remember when this happened, and it definitely seemed like, oh, great. So you're basically just trying to do the classic ridiculing of a UFO witness or somebody who's expressing an interest in these phenomena. That's pretty nasty. A lot of great other stuff, as I mentioned. NASA scientist says patented Exodus effect propellantless propulsion drive that defies physics is ready to go to space. This over thedebrief.org. This and a couple of other articles led me down a path that I was just not very familiar with, which is the type of propulsion systems that modern satellites are using up in space and orbit. Interesting stuff if you're into space travel and the idea of humans getting off this rock. Meanwhile, over at one of those YouTube channels that focuses on these alternative propulsion technologies, there's an interesting interview. It's about 45 minutes long with Maya Cowan on UAP and cultural anthropology. This interview and others were recorded by the channel's main representative who does his own podcast and has done some great interviews. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but this one is unlike all the others because it's not so much about technology, at least from the title, but more about cultural anthropology as it intersects with UFO, UAP studies. And I'm always very excited to see that kind of work out there because I'm sick to death of this new post-2017 focus on nuts and bolts and aviation threats and all that, all of which is important and relevant, but it leaves out the people and the effect on societies through culture and storytelling. Related to some of this is more stuff from the debrief. Scientists demonstrate the ability to control smart devices from within lucid dreams. Now, this is fascinating. We've fairly regularly reported on dreaming research as well as lucid dream research, as well as lucid dream technology, how to induce it. And back in, I think, the late 60s was when the lucid dream state was first really documented by way of a lucid dreamer named Alan Worsley signaling to scientists in the laboratory, the sleep lab, from within his dream through a pre-agreed upon signaling with the eyes, some sort of that yes, no, and being able to say basically, I am in the dream, I'm aware I'm in the dream, and I'm trying to signal the lab. And there's been a lot of repetition of those types of experiments. And in this case, they're using this kind of technology to trigger smart home devices. Now, what practical purpose this has, not really sure, but I really like the idea and am intrigued to see where that goes. And there's the actual article over the debrief. Can smart devices be controlled from lucid dreams? Tons of other great articles, and we'll get to some of this, but and more video misidentifications in my estimation of people seeing, and this isn't an actual picture here, watch Texas Motorist Films Mysterious Object Falling from the Sky. To my eye. This is nothing falling from the sky. This is simply a contrail, not this actual picture, but the video at the link of, yet again, people misidentifying contrails that look like fireballs because of the way the sun is hitting the ice crystals in the contrail. And it just keeps going. So I just show that as an example of like, no, it's still happening. People misidentifying that kind of thing. Anyway, lots more. There's that article I mentioned. This Mars rock could show evidence of life. Here's what Perseverance rover found. Yeah. Then we're back to last week. Okay. So in the previous week's episode, I was talking about Stephen Greer having apparently finally specifically said that he believes that the Betty and Barty Hill case was a case of mind control, MILABs, military abductions. And, since at least the mid-90s, he's been saying that most abduction cases are fake, are staged on the part of some government military operations, humans faking alien encounters. And this is, of course, an idea that I've played around with and researched for a long time, and there are a lot of interesting ideas about this. So I had also pointed out the recent explication of one of my favorite UFO cases, the Joe Simonton, Wisconsin alien pancakes, space pancakes case, and how one of my favorite group of paranormal community hosts, the Newkirks, Greg and Dana Newkirk, with their Paramuseum and their Haunted Objects podcast, had done a podcast for this called We Found the Space Pancakes, America's Weirdest UFO Encounter. And I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. And then today I saw this post, or rather yesterday, from Jeff Knox. I'm acquaintances with the Newkirks. I mean, we're not close friends by any means, but I really respect what they do and find them to be a fascinating couple and doing great work in creating one of the best paranormal communities I am aware of. And they're not focused on UFOs per se, but that, of course, is a large part of the areas that they cover, but more paranormal ghost hunting, though they don't like that phrase like so many have kind of shifted away from. But another mutual friend who I really respect, Jeff Knox, Jeff does a constant flow of On This Day in UFO History, where he posts synopses of famous aspects of UFO history with all the documentation and links. Very good synopses of these different cases and whatnot. Highly recommend you seek him out. You can search on YouTube for Jeff Knox and a YouTube channel called UFO Sunset. Yes, a YouTube channel called UFO Sunset. And I had forgotten that back in April, he'd done a lecture on that channel for the UFO Sunset show on the Joe Simonton case. And as usual, it was really great, very deep dive. But he's now, without using the P plagiarism word, it's all over the P word, Pancakes. He's very upset. He feels like he's seen this video of the Newkirks and feels like they've basically more or less stolen his research. They did provide a link to his online lecture and other resources that are in their presentation. But anyway, I'll be providing the link. You can look at both and make up your own mind. I feel like, I hate drama, except where it's warranted. And I know he feels this is warranted. And a lot of people are chiming in and saying, this is terrible and shouldn't do that. And you're right to speak out about this. And of course, I get it. Anytime you put a lot of effort into something and then you see seemingly what to your eyes looks like somebody taking advantage or benefiting from the fruits of your labor, it's very frustrating. Now, I would just say in their defense, this is a situation now where there are so many people producing content, especially on UFOs, and mining all the ever expanding materials that are being preserved and scanned and uploaded and made available more widely than ever before, that there's a lot of overlap. And I, unrelated to the field of UFOs, I'm a survivor of a mass shooting from 1979 in San Antonio. And when I was in high school, I wrote an essay about it. And one of the first things I did years later was put it up online. And then one day I came across an article that was really good about the shooting, and I'm reading it, and it's very comprehensive and it's got all this information. And I realized that they seem to have lifted the phrasing and content of my article and worked it into this article of theirs. And it was very frustrating, with no credit whatsoever, as far as I could tell or recall. This is so many years ago, and I saw water off the duck's back. But Anyway, so just briefly, Jeff Knox says, so there are these people, the Newkirks, that are some of the bigger paranormal content creators. People have probably seen some of their films or series. Hellier, I noticed they had a new podcast episode on the Joe Simonton case where they say they have discovered new info no one has ever heard before that will change ufology. So I decided to watch, see if they found anything new. First thing I realized is they didn't do the research. I did. You can read the rest there. This is public. That's the way his Facebook settings are. I hope he doesn't feel badly about me calling attention to this. And I would just want people to get along. But again, I just think it's really hard. It's very easy for all this stuff to overlap. But something I wanted to use this as an opportunity to continue something I intended to say last week when I was talking about this idea, because what they uncover or rediscover is something, again, that Jeff does report in his video. This idea, this information that apparently has been available since the case emerged back in the 60s, that there were allegations that hypnosis was used to, if not outright create the experience that Joe Simonton had. The alternate version is that they just used the hypnosis to have him reinforce the original story or experience that he had. Either way, there is this idea of the induction of a UFO contact experience, not an abduction, but a contact experience. And one of the the producer of the show, the Haunted Objects podcast, describes it as kind of like the last of the contactee cases, that the Joe Simonton case kind of represents that last of the contactee cases. Now, that's not obviously exactly true, because these things just kind of keep going. There's still contact cases happening now, but I find this very interesting. And so here is the Joe Simonton case, Jeff Knox, UFOs number 4, from his April 28, 2024 instance of this, where it's about 40-minute long lecture, very comprehensive, really good deep dive. I really enjoy his work. And as a quick aside, well, I don't want to be too personal, but he's recently lost a pet. And yeah, so anyway, you can watch this there. But the point I kind of wanted to make, and here are just some other examples of people talking about the case. It's been around for, like I say, a long, long time. This is Jose Antonio Caravaca's Distortion Theory blog. This is a post he did back in March of 2014 on the story. It goes into this whole idea. And again, everybody loves the pancakes. And so everybody's always trying to find out where those pancakes went. And sure enough, classic UFO researcher Barry Greenwood had one of the last pieces and has since donated it to David Marler's facility in New Mexico, the National UFO Historical Records Center, NUFOHRC. And there's, other articles about this. This one over at LinkedIn from 2018, Searching for Pancakes, and even over at the Anomalist at anomalous.com. Basic Pancakes, a 4 breakfast story by Lauren Coleman. All of this, just as examples of how far back this goes. And I mean, obviously it goes back all the way to the case when it first emerged in the late 60s. But what I really wanted to comment on is, again, this idea of the suggestion of mind control and the use of hypnosis to induce or manipulate people's UFO stories, their encounter stories, their abduction or contact stories. And one of the first episodes, the third episode of the Haunted Objects podcast that the Newkirks did back in late 2022, examining Betty Hill's alien abduction dress. I really enjoyed this episode. Again, this is a very long, hour and 7 minutes podcast. Highly recommend it. But in it, they reminded me and the viewers of something else that happened. They allude to the fact that they have done an experiment where they induced an alien abduction experience, completely created it in a person, allegedly, back in 2012. And in fact, it's in Hellier Season 2, Episode 7, in which you get to see some of this footage. Now, I believe within their Patreon-supported community, they have access to all the art. You, as a patron, have access to all the archives, and I think you can go and watch the raw video, I think. But it is also at least partly in Episode 7 of Season 2 of Hellier. Now, Hellier, the whole other subject unto itself, but it's a fun ride, though many people find it very boring and pointless. But I found it very interesting, and to each their own. But this is the video in which they talk about how in 2012 they set out to create an abduction experience whereby they had a professional hypnotist instill an experience in their friend Jason. That's Jason there. And yeah, you can watch this. I'll provide the link. It's for free on their Planet Weird YouTube channel. Like I say, it's about the 23-minute, 30-second mark in episode 7 of season 2, aka The Trickster. And that's all I really wanted to say. It's just I find it fascinating that they actually did this. Whether you think this was a good idea or ethical, that is obviously a big question here. And I remember when I first was hearing about this, before I'd actually seen the footage, and if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think they had like a pre-written script that they were trying to instill into the person. It was more a matter of seeding the experience of being somewhere, seeing a light in the sky, and having the feeling that they were going to be taken, and then whatever came up was created out of the mind of that individual. That's my memory of it, and maybe I've been hypnotized and my memory changed. All right, let's shift gears here. Let me close some of these windows in the background here, folks. Let my computer have a little breather and me take a drink. So I really enjoy articles by journalist Billy Cox. He has a Substack called Life in Jonestown. Nice provocative name for a blog or website. And in this latest article, I don't know if it's latest, but his July 22nd, 2024 article of Stars and Bonfires at Home on the Range with Robert Hastings, UFO Abductees. I was not expecting something that to me is as interesting as this. Now, for those who aren't familiar, I've been involved in UFO stuff pretty much all my life, but when I graduated from high school in 1989, I became involved shortly thereafter in the local MUFON, Mutual UFO Network chapter here in Austin. And this was also right as the abduction phenomena was just taking off and exploding. And one of the local abductees started a local abductee experiencer support group. And eventually I was asked to lead that group, even though I'm not an experiencer or abductee. And then I had also been leading the local MUFON chapter at some point. All this is to say that, no stranger to the UFO abduction scene, and that is, you don't really hear a lot about abductions anymore. Ever since the 2017 renaissance or whatever new wave of UAP BS, the rebranding, there's been a jettisoning of the abductees and the personal aspect of the UFO phenomenon. I mean, obviously, you still see and hear people, particularly military pilots and witnesses who have had, or as people often have with these sightings, profound change in their personality or in their worldview, but you really just don't hear a lot about abductees anymore. And I will say that there has been much talk in waves over the last 20 plus years since September 11th that it seems like the abductions really subsided. Now, they have definitely never gone away, but a lot of people feel like they have subsided. So I just want to check. I want to read some of this. There's a lot of very interesting stuff here. Basically, Billy Cox report on how he and a number of abductees, experiencers were invited out to this remote off-the-grid home in the San Luis Valley where Robert Hastings lives. Now, there's a lot of stuff here that was news to me. First of all, I have a very pleasant memory. I don't know what year it was, but I'm guessing it was either the late 80s or early 1990s when Robert Hastings came to Austin and was speaking about UFOs at the University of Texas here in Austin. And I was shocked and amazed that UT was covering this, was allowing a UFO lecture on its campus. And I, being so into this, of course, went, and I really enjoyed it. I wasn't very familiar with Robert Hastings at the time, and I've unfortunately not kept up with his work really since. But I remember going away from it and telling people, wow, it was really great. And it was also amazing in that he never talked about abductions. Now, he did at some point early on, I think, say, hey, look, I'm not going to be talking about this. I'm talking about stuff I can verify, stuff I can document, stuff that's less sensationalistic. And wow. So the opening line here, like a drooling chimera locked away in the cellar, alien abduction has been thumping against the floorboards of the UFO controversy for nearly 60 years. And then he says, abduction is pure kryptonite. It leaps light years beyond upside down physics and dares us to reimagine ourselves as lab rats. That's bookends to the first paragraph. He mentions a book I am not familiar with. In 2022, retired British entrepreneur Steve Aspin produced an exceptionally confident take on the phenomena called Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. It rolled decades of testimonials, surveys, and anecdotal patterns into the scope of his own personal waking nightmare. The ordeal inspired a unified field theory of sorts regarding the endgame of the abduction program. Aspin predicted the truth as he saw it would be received with the sort of disconnect expressed by former SCOTUS Justice Felix Frankfurter to an eyewitness briefing on Nazi death camps. In 1943, Polish resistance fighter Jan Karski huddled with Frankfurter in hopes of persuading him to alert FDR to the industrial-grade extermination of Jews in occupied Europe. Frankfurter's reply, "I don't believe you." The Associate Justice quickly clarified for Poland's ambassador, who was in on the meeting, and vouched for Karski's credibility, quote, "I did not say that he is lying. I said that I did not believe him," unquote. Aspin's truth, however, makes Karski look like a piker. So there's basically descriptions of these, round the fire discussions of these people's experiences. And these are lots of different witnesses and experiencers to abductions and strange things, mostly people with military backgrounds. And the takeaway, as he says here, as Aspin makes his case, hardcore abduction researchers acquainted with the work of retired Temple University history professor David Jacobs will note familiar themes in Aspin's narrative. Other threads, however, are a bit more novel. And this is the idea that, it's the classic interpretation of the abduction phenomena as prelude to colonization, and this idea of hybridization and the Greys as robots, sexless robots, and the next level up of the slightly taller Greys being the male and female middle management, and the mantis-like beings, 7 feet tall or more, being the omnipotent runners of the show. Now, of course, the mantis beings didn't really emerge, as far as I can tell, until the 1990s. First started really hearing about that then, but it's still, like the original abduction cases, it really wasn't talked about or allowable amongst UFO researchers. And if I can, I'd like to mention some parts of the book I'm still reading by Greg Agigian, the historian, After the Flying Saucers Came. On page 159, he was talking about Coral Lorenzen. Jim and Coral Lorenzen were the heads of APRO, the APRO UFO research organization, and their exposure to the pre-Betty and Barney Hill case from Brazil, the Antonio Villalobos case that involves sexual liaison and classic alien abduction, before that kind of thing had really become commonplace, way before, and how gauche it was to even report on it. Now, this is from a section, I forget which chapter, but the subsection is called Loverboy and the Big Plan. Lorenzen was torn about how to handle the incident. Privately, she believed Villalobos and thought his experience deserved to be publicized. Fontes, on the other hand, worried that its sexual nature made it too lewd for a wider audience. Lorenzen, who described herself as holding, quote, broad opinions of sex, unquote, personally found nothing shocking in the Loverboy incident, as they called it. She decided, however, to keep the story in-house, only mentioning it to a select few people in the APRO organization. She wouldn't raise the matter in public until the end of 1962. Now, pages later, she had been corresponding with a Swedish researcher. Back in Sweden, Gösta Rehn seemed unfazed by the prospect of an alien conquest. So, we'll get to this, but basically, she and a few researchers had collated all these classic distant light sightings, close encounters, vehicle stoppages cases, and the progression, the escalation in these types of incidents and encounters and sightings and close encounters, and saw a pattern. Back in Sweden, Gösta Rehn seemed unfazed by the prospect of an alien conquest. He wrote Lorenzen back, telling her that, quote, the idea of mass landings and attacks suits me very well, unquote. Given the state of the world, it might well bring a needed change. Quote, I am misanthropic enough to welcome such a solution of the messy human problem. Fake democracies, boundarish, low-down commercialism rampant, almost everybody suffering from stress, neurotic bodily ailments due to a civilization that promotes evil and stunts biological and mental growth. The stupid resistance against the planned economy compared with which Soviet becomes a hope. And the impossibility of total disarmament unless we get a world government and an armed police force. Perhaps the saucer catastrophe will force the nations to form that world government. So right there, from this quote from Sweden's Gösta Rehn back in the late 60s, is already intimating what many people had already kind of intimated, this idea that humanity would finally be united against an alien threat from outside this world, as Ronald Reagan said. This page goes on. When in 1962 she published her first book, The Great Flying Saucer Hoax, Lorenzen laid out her case to the general public for what came to be termed the hostility thesis about UFOs. Still, she continued to keep the Via Boas story under wraps. Others did not. That same year, two members of the Brazilian Society for the Study of Flying Saucers, Walter Buehler and Mario Prudente Aquino, published a piece on the encounter in the group's bulletin after traveling to the man's residence and interviewing him there. They chose to keep him anonymous, however, and referred to him only as AVB. Buehler sent a copy of the newsletter to Gordon Crichton at Flying Saucer Review in London. Like Lorenzen, he sat on the story for another 2 years in the hope that more evidence would come to light. Then in early 1965, Crichton relented, apologizing, quote, to any reader who may find this bizarre story offensive. He published the first of 9 separate articles on the Via Boas case to appear in the magazine from 1965 to 1968. In making sense of the incident, Crichton suggested that folk traditions might hold the key. Lore about encounters with incubi, succubi, spirits, goblins, and ghosts, he proposed, might well be chronicles of human contact with beings from outer space. If so, what happened to Antonio Villas Boas that night in 1957 was something that had been going on for centuries. Shades of Jacques Vallée and Passport to Magonia, and what so many of us have come to believe is a significant way to interpret modern stories of encounters with anomalous others. Now, I bring all that up in the context of this article by Billy Cox, his Life in Jonestown blog, because basically, as he invokes David Jacobs, a historian who started off like Greg Agigian, I don't think Greg's going to go down this way, but documenting the historical aspects of the UFO phenomenon. But David Jacobs, in most rational people's opinion, went off the deep end and became a proponent of the alien abduction as absolutely real-world experience and evidence that there is a hybridization program and that the beings do not have our best interest in mind. And while he may not have believed that they were evil or demonic, but that they were perpetrating evil acts and that their ultimate goals were, in fact, dangerous. Some other aspects of this article, and where we get to what I was unaware of, and I just am kicking myself. So I knew that Robert Hastings had published a book on the UFO nukes connection, that he had organized a press conference dealing with this issue and was going about this all in a very, again, rational, non-abduction aspect. What I did not realize is that, and here's his off-the-grid home, was that he apparently has long been a UFO abductee himself, and that his co-author on the UFO nukes book is also an experiencer. So here this says from the article, based on the testimony of more than 150 Air Force veterans, his 600-page UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites opus was a revelation that traced this hushed relationship back to the 1940s. In 2010, Hastings gathered 7 military veterans to take media questions at a National Press Club event live-streamed by CNN. A follow-up documentary in 2016 presented additional on-the-record testimony from ex-USAF officers and has been viewed more than 6 million times. There's links to the documentary that used to be available on Vimeo to rent or buy. It does not appear to be there anymore. I'm going to have to go dig that out. Confession as liberation. This section goes into the fact that, this new military-based UAP renaissance is just not acknowledging the history of the abduction phenomena. Now, just in the same way, people who are focused on abductions often dismiss the contactee phenomena. Rightly or wrongly, they just don't even bother addressing it. Or if they do, it's, as is so often the case, through ridicule and just dismissiveness. Now, this is where I did not realize Mr. Hastings' trajectory had so significantly changed. In 2019, 2 years after having been diagnosed with progressive heart failure, his field research days over, Hastings produced his second book, Confession, Our Hidden Alien Encounters Revealed. No longer worried about alienating potential new witnesses, he went public with his own previously closeted and lifelong abduction experiences. His co-author, Bob Jacobs, I don't think he's related to David Jacobs, is the former Air Force lieutenant who recorded alleged still classified footage of a UFO disabling a dummy warhead following a launch off Big Sur in 1964. Jacobs and Hastings decided to collaborate and fess up to what they'd been concealing after discovering they shared a quirk of the abduction phenomena. More later on that. So there's some great anecdotes here about the different attendees, these military experiencers, UFO witnesses, abductees, some of whom are still remaining anonymous. Some you will recognize them from famous cases who had all gathered to talk about their experiences unhindered by the pressures of society amongst their friends there at Mr. Hastings' residence. And it just gives example after example of them being dismissed by people as they try to produce documentaries or, to talk more publicly about about the UFO phenomena. But again, it's a bridge too far for so many when it comes to these kinds of experiences. Again, more pictures of around the fireside. And, they're very much playing with their interpretation, given that they are immersed in this experience. And so they're not trying to necessarily be, investigators or debunkers or skeptics of their own experiences or their colleagues' experiences in this effort. But I highly recommend this. I really think you should go check that. It's over at lifeinjonestown.substack.com of stars and bonfires. Some very strange experiences described, lots of references to the implant research, and this idea of people being ruined by being outed about their experiences and the dangers of that. Now, towards the end, spoiler, the night before, reading again from the article, the night before the guests started arriving, Hastings, 74, woke up at 4:44 a.m. In Missouri, one time zone east, Bob Jacobs, 86, woke up at 3:33 a.m. This has been going on for years. They got a chuckle out of it. At least this time, there was no blood on the pillow. Hastings calls it the triple-digit thingy, TDT, a subset of, quote, all self-aware abductees, he writes in confession, report being jolted from nightmares involving aliens at precisely 1:11, 2:22, 3:33, 4:44, or 5:55. Given the potential vibes a crowd like this might project over a few days, the digital calling card seemed auspicious. A few openly wondered if an event lay ahead. And again, spoiler alert, full disclosure at the end, he says, I spent the last night on the road in a Colorado Springs hotel near the airport where I had this weird dream, blah, 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 blah. The other details fled when I got up to take a leak. The nightstand clock read, seriously, I'm not making this up, 3:33. I guess you could say I lucked out, maybe at least for now. Now, I wanted to mention that last bit just because it reminded me of how back when I was running the abductee support group, at least I think it was before the leader had moved on and had me start, there was an experiencer and his roommate, Bo and Hagar, who are featured in at least one of abduction researcher Carla Turner's books. And at one point, they brought to the group the fact that they were having that exact same clock phenomena, digital clock phenomena, waking up. In their case, I remember them saying, this would happen like all in the same night. They'd wake up at 1:11, 2:22, 3:33, 4:44, 5:55. And then it would happen again. Now, I don't recall them linking it to waking up from UFO or alien abduction nightmares, but they were experiencing a variety of strange bedroom visitation type experiences and seemingly, to some degree, mutually witnessed experiences, at least one that I recall. That's, I think, documented in Carla's book. I forget which book. But ironically, at the time, I remember thinking to myself, well, maybe my math is wrong, but it was 71 minutes difference between the time. It was an hour and 11 minutes difference, I believe, between 1:11, 2:22, 3:33. Somebody's going to correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. And around the same time, when I realized it was 71 minutes, I had just read about Lam, the entity that Aleister Crowley, the ultimate occultist that so many people like to think horrible things about, back in 1918, 1919, had done a ritual and allegedly been contacted by this being. Now, back in the 90s, my good friend Greg Bishop was publishing the Excluded Middle magazine, and this was one of the articles featured in the magazine and posted to the website, now available only through Archive.org, Aleister Crowley and the Lamb Statement by Ian Blake, 1996. And there is the classic portrait of Lamb, that this particular reproduction of it, you can see certain features. A lot of people have immediately gone, wait a minute, that's like the classic big-headed alien. And you can almost kind of see, like, here's its eyes, but like you can almost kind of see eyes here and these little swirling figures under the crown of its head. And there's all kinds of things you can see in this portrait. Now, I don't know if any of this has much to do with anything, but again, I remember reading that, and now this is from a fandom website, a fandom wiki called H.P. Lovecraft Wiki. And there's a quote from Aleister Crowley from his book, Liber LXXI, that says, quote, "The way. Lam is the Tibetan word for way or path, and Lama is he who goeth. The specific title of the gods of Egypt, the treader of the path in Buddhistic phraseology. Its numerical value is 71, the number of this book," which is, I believe, the book in which Crowley first described that ritual and the resulting Lamb interaction. Now, yeah, all this stuff is out there. Is it relevant? Probably not. But this was a synchronicity for me, and I shared it with Bo and Hagar. I don't know that they particularly found anything relevant with it for them, but there you go. Here's another article by Michael M. Hughes that I don't think is available on his website anymore. Saucers of the Sorcerers, excerpt Ritual of Lamb from 2015. Then there's Mir Zar, who is Martin Kottmeyer. Why I don't regard Lam as a gray alien, and his explication of why he thinks this is just a superfluous false connection. I could not find another thing I saw recently, which is somebody who posted a picture of a monk, a bald monk with prayer hands with his head turned down in a pose that really mimics the image of you see in that picture of Lam. And then there's this other one from Marco Visconti, FAQ, how did Crowley contact Lamb? Anyway, there's a lot of information out there, none of it necessarily directly relevant to any of this, but I just provide that connection there for those who might find that interesting. All right, gosh, we're already almost an hour in. I'm going to try to go through this really quickly, folks, but sticking kind of with UFOs and then again going a bit divergent. I've mentioned before, I'm a big fan of Aaron Golias's podcast, The Saucer Life. You can find all the episodes there at saucerlife.com. He recently did an episode about Elmwood, Wisconsin, where he happens to have been giving a lecture for the Elmwood UFO Days, which apparently may, in fact, be the oldest UFO festival celebrating a UFO sighting or series of sightings in the entire United States. Not 100% sure that that's the case, but it's a multi-witness, multi-sighting case that happened in 1975, 1976, and points in between, and which subsequently launched a little regional festival, which you can find at wisconsinfrights.com as their Elmwood UFO Days web page. And this event just went off, and Aaron's going to be posting, I think, his lecture, his audio lecture, etc. And among the other little interesting factoids is this Dan Rather news report from 1988, in which they talk about a plan back in 1988 to build a massive, expensive UFO landing site in Elmwood, Wisconsin. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video for you. It's about just over 3 minutes long. Where is that? Here we go.
Fewer than 1,000 people live in Elmwood, Wisconsin, so why on earth would a tiny community like that talk about building a $50 million landing pad? Well, as Frank Courier explains, Earth has little to do with it. The impulse behind Elmwood's project is out of this world.
At the bottom of a country road in a town tucked deep in the hills of western Wisconsin, after sunset, folks start seeing things they can't explain.
I could see the little legs on it, like little pods on the bottom. It was a saucer-shaped deal.
When I got over the village, and it was gone out of sight.
It may sound outrageous coming from respectable Midwest dairy farmers and their neighbors, but no one's laughing in Elmwood, population 900, where everyone has either seen a UFO or knows a friend who has.
People call it the Forbidden Village in the Forsaken Valley.
With scores of UFO sightings here the past decade, and with inspiration from the movie Close Encounters, Elmwood townspeople are supporting plans to build a 2-square-mile landing pad for aliens, who some think are waiting for an invitation to make contact.
In our opinion, this is going to represent man's grand attempt here to reach out and establish a relationship with this society.
Businessman Tom Weber and associates have formed a corporation to raise $50 million for the project.
$50 million, and it might cost more.
On radio talk shows, added town hall meetings, the dream has attracted some cash, along with hundreds of letters and extraterrestrial sketches. At first, reaction in town was mixed.
If they're going to land, they don't need to put no landing strip up there.
This will be around here as any place else, I guess. If they're going to build something like that, why not here?
But all the UFO talk has made believers out of old-timers like Hobbs Wilson.
I seen it. I know what I seen. I'm a believer in it.
While a few skeptics say the lights in this old limestone quarry may play tricks after 3 beers, it was here 12 years ago Elmwood claimed its first UFO encounter, witnessed by village police chief George Wheeler, who died 2 years later, who told his widow Doris he'd been zapped by a beam of blue light from a hovering spacecraft.
I do believe they're from another planet. I really do.
The people here in Dairy Country who support the notion of a concrete welcome mat ringed by thousands of lights are not discouraged that aliens have ignored less ambitious landing pads elsewhere. Over the years, crude landing sites have been abandoned in at least 4 states, including Pennsylvania, where all that's left is a model of a flying saucer now ringed by trailers.
UFO is coming all over town here.
An interplanetary landing pad may be light years away, but it's no joke in Elmwood, perhaps the only town on Earth to host an annual UFO Days festival and parade.
I'm not saying they are, I ain't saying they ain't, but if they're going to be any place, they'll be in Elmwood.
A town where most people never have to cross Main Street to reach the outer limits. Frank Courier, CBS News, Elmwood, Wisconsin.
Again, quickly trying to wrap up, but still got bunch of things I wanted to mention. Last week, we were talking about the fact that you could see previews of Lou Elizondo's new book, Imminent. Of course, previously there had been copies going on sale on Amazon that turned out to be fake. A lot of people getting angry when they received a bootleg fake copy that apparently had nothing to do, but just they faked the cover and the contents. Well, apparently somebody leaked. Allegedly, I'm not really sure if this is the correct way. There was a brief period where there was a preview available on Google Books of Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, and certain people, mostly skeptics, dove right in and dug it for gold. And there's 2 posts by a researcher, a skeptic, a real debunker who I often find helpful information through his blog, even as I dislike his attitude and vitriol. Eye roll. Jason Colavito, his blog is at his website with that name, jasoncolavito.com. Back in July 23rd, Lou Elizondo claims psychic powers, an excerpt from new memoir. This is interesting to me because it apparently in the new book is more about what we'd been hearing through some associates of Elizondo, and occasionally he would make references to it, that he had been a trained psychic remote viewer of some skill or repute, and that appears to be something that's in the new book. Won't know until it actually comes out. The preview has since been closed. The book has still not been released, but is coming out next month, allegedly, so we'll see. But there's other information in another blog from Jason Colavito, a Lou Elizondo memoir dubbed quote-unquote King of Torture, Haunted by Bubbles, Talks Nephilim. This one from a few days later, July 26th. And what I find most interesting here is it reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in some time, which was when Lou first came onto the scene, one of the things that really concerned me was the fact that he apparently worked at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, that I don't know if he was an interrogator or simply an interpreter, but in these 2 excerpt reviews by Jason at his Skeptics blog, he makes reference to this. And from the blog, he's, quote, he also claims to have engaged in the torture of 9/11 detainees at Guantanamo Bay, been dubbed the, quote, King of Torture unquote, by a detainee's lawyer and to have a European arrest warrant issued against him for torture. And as Calavetto comments, this somehow didn't stop him from traveling to Europe for UFO conferences. The book seems to have no references or documentation, making it hard to check these claims. Now, maybe that's because you didn't have access to anything but these excerpts as opposed to source notes and citations. I don't know. But this is very concerning to me. And, you know, whatever your feelings are about the war on terror post 9/11 and the, in my estimation, horrible things that this country did in the name of national security and in retribution for the events of September 11, 2001, this is just beyond the pale. And I don't know if any of this is true. I'm assuming it had to be vetted, and we'll probably hear more in the coming months. But that really, really bothers me. There's another, I don't know which article it's in, but it's probably in the previous one, where Elizondo claims that he and a group of remote viewers, military remote viewers, worked together to try and work on a terror suspect, a convicted terrorist who was being held somewhere, and that they projected themselves to his cell to try to get information out of him or rattle him or something. And allegedly, let's find this. So yes, here we go. In the following years, I was privileged to meet 4 other remote viewers who had been trained in the discipline. We often talked about our experiences with the technique. One afternoon, we discussed the capture of a suspected terrorist who had been on the government's radar for a long time. He was being held in a location thousands of miles from us. I had been to the location before. As a test, we all gathered together in a secure facility at the Pentagon with our brown bag lunches and attempted an act of group remote viewing. We directed our conjoined thoughts towards a specific terrorist in his cell. None of us had any sympathy for the ruthless killer who gleefully took the lives of our comrades. I wondered if we would leave a real impact on him. Something happened, all right. Months later, we learned that the terrorist had told his lawyers that the CIA had sent 5 angels to disrupt his sleep. 5 figures washed in a white light stood over his bed and shook it violently, leaving him terrified. He felt that judgment was upon him. He shared the story with his attorney, and the tale later ended up in a mainstream newspaper article about a secret CIA program being used to harass his client. I told Hal Puthoff what we had done. He was not surprised. That's over on this page here. This excerpt, no longer available. All right, make of that what you will. But, you know, it is certainly been documented. I don't know, again, you can't trust Wikipedia, but here it is. It's on Lou Elizondo's Wikipedia page. In college, Elizondo studied microbiology and immunology and parasitology. He later served in the U.S. Army for 20 years, during which he ran military intelligence operations in Afghanistan, South America, and Guantanamo Bay's Camp 7, which was the worst, probably, camp. Regarding his military career, Elizondo stated he, quote, dealt with a lot of stuff like coup d'etats, black market terrorism, violent drug cartels, all that kind of stuff, unquote. So, again, other skeptics that have reported on what they found in the book that also references the connection to Guantanamo Bay, Mick West's metabunk.org, and down a ways. And there's this bit, Elizondo's book mentions he had previously been at the same location the captured, quote-unquote, suspected terrorist was being held, which was 1,000 miles away. KSM is being held at Camp 7 in Guantanamo Bay. Elizondo's Wikipedia article lists him as having previously worked at Camp 7. However, the supporting articles cited refer more broadly to Guantanamo Bay. Now, this is a digression here, but all of this reminds me of what my friends and I reported on back in the early, mid to late aughts, post 9/11, and all the atrocities that were going on in the name of the war on terror. Now, flash forward to February 2014, and you have the Times of Israel and others reporting on Annie Jacobson's article, CIA Techniques Developed by Ex-Nazis, Author Claims. In Operation Paperclip, Annie Jacobson says Cold War interrogation program using LSD enjoyed help from Third Reich doctors. Now, this may have been news to some folks back in 2014, but many of us knew about this 6 years earlier or longer from previous reportage, some done by myself and others, not the investigative reporting, but just reporting on other people's work, like Professor Pan's blog, no longer available, but available through the archive.org website, Sex, Drugs, Mind Control, and Gitmo from July of 2005. that talks about this idea that according to an article in the New Yorker, one of the only major publications still gutsy enough to publish critical investigative journalism, this was circa 2005, the ghosts of Gottlieb, Cameron, and the other architects of MK Ultra and Bluebird are alive and well and continuing their devastating psychological abuse and experimentation. A new generation of psychologists and physicians are turning the Hippocratic Oath on its head in their attempts to shape and modify behavior, much of it under the guise of extracting information from quote-unquote terrorists, some of whom are innocents caught up in the post-9/11 dragnet. It doesn't take much reading between the lines to see what is actually happening behind the scenes at Guantanamo, and what is taking place is ugly and deeply disturbing and all too familiar to students of the more sinister threads of history. Professor Pan, who is somebody whose real identity I know, wrote on this and kept reporting on it, including a similarly titled Sex, Drugs, Mind Control, and Torture Index, also archived at archive.org. That this last version was from November 2005, that has links to all the different articles from other mainstream outlets that was reporting on this. And again, just to drive this all home, flash forward a couple years from anti-fascist calling blogspot, the return of MK Ultra, evidence mounts that drugs were used on CIA ghost detainees during coercive interrogations. Or this one, actually this is me reproducing at one of my websites, Jacques Vallée, of all people, commenting through the cyberpunk outlet Boing Boing in November of 2009, quote, when it was revealed that the U.S. resorted to torture to extract information from prisoners, many people my age must have had a very somber thought for the thousands of young Americans who had given their lives on the beaches of Normandy in a brave effort to rid the world of governments engaged in such shameful practices. Two other thoughts flashed to mind. The stupidity of giving up the high moral ground at a time when the U.S. had earned so much goodwill thanks to its stand on democracy and human rights, and the pointlessness of such interrogations, often stated by our military experts, since the victims will generally admit to anything in order to stop the pain. My friend, French resistance leader Jacques Berger, who was tortured multiple times by the Gestapo, made the ludicrous quote-unquote confession that his network planned to invade Corsica. In reality, they were looking for heavy water and for Wernher von Braun's rocket base. Again, projectcensored.org's 2010 top 25 most suppressed articles. Number 10, APA complicit in CIA torture. 3 different articles were awarded this Project Censored Award, all from June, July, and August of 2007. One titled The CIA's Torture Teachers by Mark Benjamin, Rorschach in Awe by Catherine Eben, and Democracy Now's American Psychological Association rejects blanket ban on participation in interrogation of U.S. detainees, and other articles with similar horrific titles. One or two last ones. A Document Friday, Project Artichoke, where the CIA attempt to create an unwitting assassin through hypnosis. Again, all this stuff well documented. And Hank Albarelli and Jeffrey Kay. Hank Albarelli doing one of the best documents on the abuses of MK Ultra, called A Terrible Mistake. Cries from the Past, Torture's Ugly Echoes, from May of 2010, from truthout.org back in the day. And these are all mostly from archive.org because it's hard to find. All right, well, let me quickly leave you with something a little nicer than all of that, okay? And it's not UFO related, and it might be fun and enjoyable for you. This one's from SmithsonianMag.com. Could citizens of this Indiana town have seen a 500-pound turtle? 2 men said they saw such an animal dubbed the Beast of Busco in 1948. This was from July of this year. Great story. I'll read the beginning. The Beast of Busco emerged one day out of the blue. A farmer named Oscar Fulk spotted it in a 7-acre lake on his northern Indiana property in 1898. A massive turtle, Fulk swore, the size of a small dinosaur. When he ran to tell others in his small town of Churubusco, no one believed him, and the beast disappeared for 50 years. In July 1948, 2 men were fishing in the same lake when they saw an implausibly giant turtle gliding across the water's surface. This is just one of many tales you've probably heard over the years of giant or extremely large turtles. Of course, this article concludes that it likely was just a overestimation, that's a very common phenomena. When people see a large turtle, they misestimate how big or heavy it actually is. And a lot of times it's probably just a regular snapping turtle or an alligator snapping turtle. that's either out of place or, was released from the captivity from being a pet. They do have certain regions that they're known to be in, but, this comes up over and over again. And a good friend, Pete, thank you for recommending this to me. Back earlier this year, he recommended this reality TV series called Searching for the Mickenack. There are legends of great giant creatures in the North Woods that have been passed down for generations by tribal elders. They believe these sacred beasts should be left alone. A small but resourceful group of men think otherwise. Searching for the Mickenack is a 6-part series that follows this pack of friends that race to find a massive unknown animal roaming the waters of Minnesota. Rivalries emerge as some try to hunt it and kill it while others attempt to save it. Which group will find it first? I really enjoyed this series. It's reality TV, so it's hard sometimes to tell what's a recreation and what's the original real footage, if there's any in it. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I if you can stand reality TV, and if you at all have any interest in the outdoors, and in this case, not a cryptid in the sense of Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, but it's a water monster, a lake monster, so to speak. But in this case, just perhaps a really, really big alligator snapping turtle or descendant of some creature from years ago. Back in the day when I published my Elpis journal, my roommate, whose UFO sighting I wrote a report on, he had a series of UFO sightings at a Mooney Theological Seminary on the Hudson River up in the northeastern part of the country. And unrelated to the UFO sightings, he said that there was a pond on the property of the seminary where there was this giant old turtle that he described as being the size of a large coffee table. And I just always found that story very wonderful. And I love the idea of these obviously really old creatures. But one last thing. I know, gone on an hour and 20 minutes here. Video games to help solve puzzles, to crowdsource scientific projects. This article over at IGN.com, millions of Borderlands 3 players all are now collectively listed as contributors to a peer-reviewed scientific paper. Borderlands is this kind of post-apocalyptic video game. Articles, can't really see the image there, but they had an in-game process whereby the players would manipulate color codes that represented basically DNA data. And I just love this idea of kind of crowdsourcing through games, playful ways of helping process data. And it reminds me of our previous stories about SETI at home and how people would use their idle computers to help process SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence data. And of course, there's the dark side of this in terms of like books like Ender's Game and Black Mirror episodes whereby, people in VR or augmented reality, virtual reality games are, killing bugs, but the bugs turn out to be other humans or another alien species or something. In other words, using video games to hide or mask the enemy in such a way as to make it easier for them to be killed. But here is a more pleasant way in-game doing, puzzles that can help resolve scientific data. Anyway, okay, I'm out. This has gone way too long and I need to relax. So thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure and we'll see you next week.